Hello, my yarny friends. I'm Sara Sach, and welcome back to another Friday Fun Day. Well, we're going to have some fun today and make this elegant collar hooked right onto a t-shirt. You can take a t-shirt that maybe isn't your favorite, because let me tell you a secret. This shirt has a little coffee stain under here. I tried to get it out, but I couldn't. And I love how this shirt fits. So we made a collar and no one knows it's there. And now it's my favorite shirt to wear. I love to wear it yarn shopping because I get lots of compliments. So we're going to make one of these today on another t-shirt. And of course, I'll tell you all the things that you need in just a second. But if you would like to see the pattern all written out with lots of pictures, you can do that by clicking on that link that's down in the notes underneath this video. So the first thing that you're going to need, of course, is a t-shirt. And I like to use ones that are 100% cotton. And before we start the collar, if you're using a brand new shirt, run it through the wash. That way there isn't any extra shrinking or anything once you get the collar on it. I do recommend once you put the collar on that you wash these in either hand wash or gentle cycle so it doesn't mess up the collar. All right. And you need to use a t-shirt that has a rounded collar, and it doesn't matter the size of the collar. It can be a big, huge scoop neck, or it can be a tiny little collar like your average t-shirt has. I just bought this one at Walmart. It says White Stag on it, and I bought the extra large or the 2X size because it's 100% cotton, and so I washed it, and it's all ready to go. All right? Any t-shirt, as long as it has a rounded collar. All right, any size, it doesn't matter. Now the yarns that we're using are lightweight number 3 yarns. I use this one on the collar that I'm wearing. This is Yarn Bee Sparkle yarn. I liked it because it had the sparkle, and the purple part went really well with the pinky purple shirt that I was wearing. But for today's demonstration, I wanted to use a solid. And so I grabbed my Premier yarn. This is also a cotton lightweight number 3. As I wanted to use 2 solid colors so that you could see what I'm doing. Okay? And the amount, of course, depends on the size of the collar. If it's a small collar, you're not going to need as much. If it's a larger collar, you're going to need more. So I put in the pattern, you're going to need about 3 or 4 ounces, but it really depends on the size of the t-shirt and the size of the collar. If you're doing a big scoop collar, of course, you're going to need more yarn. All right, so we're going to be stitching that collar on with our H hook, which is a 5.0 millimeter crochet hook. And we're using an H on the 3 weight because we want it to be a little bit loose and lacy. All right, now as far as beads go, I'm still sticking with my small pony beads. You can use any bead that you want. The thing is, you need to make sure that you have a needle that when threaded with your yarn, that you can get that bead through, or the needle, sorry, through the bead easily. All right. And you can, this is a regular tapestry or yarn needle, a little bit of a point. You need to make sure you have a little bit of a point, not a blunt end, and that you can get that yarn through that bead. Okay. Because you're going to have the yarn threaded on your needle, and then we're going to put the beads on, of course. So check your beads, check your needle. And the amount of beads, again, depends on how big your collar is. If it's a small collar, you're not going to use as many beads, okay? But as we work the pattern, I'll explain to you how you know how many beads that you're going to need. Okay, and then, of course, the last thing you're going to need is your pair of scissors. I forgot to mention that you are going to need either a tape measure or a ruler in order to make our stitches even when we begin. All right, so we're going to take our t-shirt and we're going to turn it backwards, and we're going to begin at the back of our shirt. We're going to thread on about 18 inches or so of the yarn that we're going to be using. All right, and we're going to use our tape measure because we're going to do a stitch every 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And so what I like to do is I kind of like to just set it there. All right, let's begin. I'm going to move this first so I can show you how to do this. All right, so we're going to go through this thickness of our shirt. We want to start at the back, so when we come back around, we join to the back. So we're going to put we've threaded our yarn on that we're going to use. We're going to take our needle and we're going to stick it through there. And that's why you need to have a pointed needle, because you're going through the thickness. Okay, so we're not going to pull this through. We're going to leave that there. We're going to put this way. And we're going to hold it. And you want to measure where your 1/4 of an inch is. And I like to set it at the 1 like this. And then we'll go like this. And poke that needle through. We want our loops to be on the edge. Now, this is how it's going to look. I'm going to move this just so you can see this. All right, so I've got my yarn this way. Okay, I'm going to do this kind of slow just so you can see. We're going to pull this up. And by doing that, we formed a loop. Okay, see how that worked? And now we're going to continue this around. All right, so we want to make sure. So I'm just going to set that there. And if you're off a little bit, it's okay. There is not a set number of loops that you need. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, go to the next one. And this is the most time-consuming part of it. Okay, my yarn is behind my needle or underneath. And this is called a blanket stitch. Okay, so there we formed another loop. And as we do this, those loops are going to set at the top or edge of our t-shirt. Okay, don't pull them too tight, but also don't let them be too loose. And how far down on this you go doesn't really matter, as long as your loops sit along the top edge of your t-shirt collar. And you'll notice I'm not really measuring anymore because I kind of got an idea, because it doesn't matter if you get off a little as long as you try your best to keep it even. One thing that I like to do also is I'll take my tape measure and I'll take a piece of paper and mark off some of it, and then I can use it as I go around instead of having to drag the whole tape measure around. You can also use a ruler. And the thing is, again, every shirt is going to be different because every shirt's going to have a different size collar. And so, if I can get my needle through there. There we go. And it came out. There we go. And so, this is how it's going to look. You're going to have, out of the way, loops along the top edge where we're going to be crocheting. And you're going to do this working all the way around the collar of your shirt. Again, the amount of loops do not matter. The way I have the pattern written, it will work no matter how many loops you add, because every shirt collar is going to be a different size. If you're using a really small circle, or maybe you're doing this for a child's shirt, it's going to be smaller. Or maybe this one is a extra large 2X, maybe you're doing an extra small. Your collar is going to be smaller. All right, so we're just going to work around, trying our best to do 1/4 inch stitches. And this is going to be the most time-consuming part of this project, is stitching this blanket stitch, is what it's called, around the edge. And I like to do this. You can do this on the sleeves. You can do it on the bottom of the t-shirt. You can do this on towels, blankets, all kinds of different projects that you want to add a crochet trim to. All right, so I'm just going to keep working around. Push your needle through. Make sure that that thread is on the back side or behind your needle, and gently pull that through, and that forms the loops. And it's a good idea that you make sure that the needle that you're using has a more of a pointed edge or a blunt edge. If you don't have one, you can use an awl or some sort of a tool to poke your holes, but I really don't think it's necessary if you have a nice pointed needle. And you might have to push hard, but it's okay, it's worth it. Alrighty, so I'm going to continue working around the top of my t-shirt, and I'll meet you back around here. So I've worked around the whole collar, and I did have to add in some more yarn because I didn't have enough, and you just work that in. And when you get to the end, here's my last loop. I'm just going to go in this loop here. Let me come up a little higher here, so that we have that extra loop, and then I'm going to come, whoops, down in here so that we have enough loops. And there'll be a little bit of a bump there, but that's just so that it stays in place, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the inside of the shirt with both of our strings. Okay, and then we're just going to tie that off. And I'm making a couple of knots here. Make sure that's not going to come undone. There we go. And now we have a blanket stitch collar going all the way around the edge of our shirt. Now make sure that your shirt is sitting right side out. And we're going to begin back here. So we're going to take our yarn, and this is where we started. So I like to come over here a couple of loops. There we go. Hold that string down, and we're going to chain 4 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4. This chain 4 counts as a double crochet, chain 1. Now we're going to go into the next loop and stitch a double crochet, chain 1. We'll go to the next loop, double crochet, chain 1. And we'll do this in each of these loops working around our shirt. This is just our foundation chain, or our foundation row of stitches that's going to lay out how the pattern is going to work. And you'll notice that it's very loose, chain 1, and very lacy, which is the way we want it. And if when you're stitching you think it's a little bit too loose or too lacy, you can always go down a hook size. I liked it big and lacy because I want it to lay pretty. I think it lays prettier if it has a little bit more room to it, has nice drape. All right, so in each of the loops that we stitched on the first row in our blanket stitch, we're stitching a double crochet, chain 1. Working all the way around. And once we got past that first row of adding those blanket stitch loops, this pattern's going to go really fast. And again, it doesn't matter how many of the loops that you made, the pattern will still work because it's based on measurements instead of stitch counts. And no matter how many loops that you made, this is going to work. You will notice this is starting to be just a little bit loopy, and that's because we want it to begin laying flat. And so right now we're just adding and adding more stitches for us to work in. All right, so this is row 2 because row 1 was our blanket stitch. We're stitching 1 double crochet, chain 1 in each of those blanket stitch loops. And we'll work this all around the collar and join back to that first chain 3 of that chain 4. I have worked all the way around my collar, stitching a double crochet, chain 1 in each of my loops of my blanket stitches. All right, so here's my last one. Make a chain 1. I'm going to join to the 3rd chain of that beginning chain 4 with a slip stitch, and then we're going to slip stitch in the chain 1 space and chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now we're going to double crochet in the same space that we just stitched that chain 4, and so we made a V stitch. All right, we're going to skip the next chain 1 space and stitch a V stitch in the next, which is a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Skip the next chain 1 space and go in the next chain 1 space and stitch a V stitch. Double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And so what we're doing for row 3 is stitching a V stitch in every other chain 1 space. Skip this one, stitch a V stitch in the next. Skip the next one, stitch a V stitch in the next. And we'll do this working all the way around. And see how quickly the collar is growing, and how thick it is or tall it is already. All right, so I'm going to continue working around, stitching a V stitch in every other chain 1 space. I have completed row 3, stitching a V stitch in every other chain 1 space. Now, when you get to the end, you may have 1 or 2 of the chain 1 spaces left. Okay, so what you would want to do is, if you just have the 1, go ahead and join to the 3rd chain of the chain 4 beginning. If you have 2, go ahead and place a V stitch in that last one and then join. It's not going to hurt anything, and it's going to make it lay better than skipping 2 of the chain 1 spaces. Okay, I just happen to have 1, and so I'm going to join to the 3rd chain, and then I'm going to go in the chain 1 space of the V stitch with a slip stitch and chain 4. Row 4 is similar to row 3. We're going to do V stitches in all the chain 1 spaces of the V stitches, but we're going to chain 1 in between. So we have our chain 4 that counts as a double crochet, chain 1, so we'll double crochet in that same chain 1 space and then chain 1. Then we'll go to the next V stitch and stitch our double crochet, chain 1, double crochet V stitch, and then chain 1. And we'll do this on each of the chain 1 spaces of the V stitches. So V stitch in each of the chain 1 spaces of the V stitches and chain 1. By adding the chain 1 space in between all the V stitches, it's going to cause our collar to flare out even more. So I'm going to continue working around, stitching a V stitch in each of the chain 1 spaces of the V stitches and chain 1, and repeat all the way around. I have completed row 4. We stitched a V stitch, chain 1, in each of the chain 1 spaces of our V stitches. So again, I'm going to join to the 3rd chain of the 4. I'm going to slip stitch in that first chain 1 space of our first V stitch and chain 4. And so for row 5, we're going to stitch a V stitch in each of the chain 1 spaces of our V stitches, only this time we're going to chain 2 in between our V stitches. So double crochet, chain 1, double crochet in the chain 1 space of our V stitch, and chain 2. And we're going to repeat this again, working all the way around. V stitch in the chain 1 space of our V stitch, and chain 2. And this is the last row before we do our beads. Whoops, chain 2. So, just to repeat, V stitch in the chain 1 space of the V stitches, and chain 2 in each of the chain 1 spaces of our V stitches, working all the way around. I have completed row 5, stitching a V stitch in each of the chain 1 spaces of the V stitches with chain 2s in between. Now, this is as big as I'm making my collar. My next row I'm going to add on beads. If you want your collar to be a little bit longer, you can do another row of V stitches, only put 3 chains in between, and repeating that, adding an extra chain in between each of your V stitches for every row that you add, and make the collar a little bit longer. I didn't want it any longer than this. This is where I wanted to stop. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our yarn. We joined to the chain 3 and then slip stitched in the next stitch, and now we're just going to weave this in. The next row we'll be adding the beads, and so we're going to add the beads onto our working yarn. So I'm going to go ahead and take a couple minutes here and weave in this end, and then I'll show you how to add your beads on that last row. So what you're going to do is you're going to thread your needle onto your working yarn. And the way that you know how many beads to put on is how many chain 2 spaces that you have. So you'll count your chain 2 spaces all the way around, and then you'll add that many beads. Now I'm just randomly adding beads to mine. I don't care about the color. I think it's going to be super pretty, all random and with different colors. Since I put 2 solids, a solid shirt and a solid collar, I decided to go with colorful beads. You can do it however you want. You can do all white, you can do all silver. Just make sure you put on 1 bead for every one of the chain 2 spaces. And remember, this is onto our working yarn. So I have all the beads I need on my working yarn, and that's the yarn that's still attached to your work here. I took my needle off. I'm going to go in that V stitch, pull up a loop. We're going to chain 1 and then single crochet in that V stitch. Chain 3. And now we'll pull up a bead. And chain 1. Now we're going to slip stitch in the chain behind the bead. And chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Now we'll go to the next V stitch and single crochet. All right, I'm going to pull my camera in so you can see that just a little bit closer. All right, this is a lot closer. So we single crocheted in the chain 1 space of our V stitch. We're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. We're going to pull up our next bead and chain 1. Then we're going to go to the chain behind that bead and slip stitch. And chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Then we'll go to the next V stitch and stitch a single crochet. Okay, and by slip stitching behind that bead, it's going to cause that bead to come forward a little bit more. All right, let's do another one. Chain 3, pull up a bead, chain 1 and slip stitch behind that bead, and chain 3. And then single crochet in the next V-stitch and chain 3. My t-shirt's sliding off the table here. There we go. All right, so this is the way that that's going to look. And by doing that slip stitch behind the bead, it's going to cause that bead to show better. All right. So we pull the bead up, we chain 1 and then slip stitch behind the bead and chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then single crochet in the next V-stitch. More yarn here. 1, 2, 3. Let's see, pull up the next bead. Chain 1, slip stitch behind the bead in that chain. I made that one a little bit snug. There we go. 1, 2, and 3. And then single crochet in the next V-stitch. See how that looks? Now, one thing I found that makes this a little bit easier and go a little bit quicker is to use a table or maybe have a magazine or a book on your lap if you're sitting in a chair. Where you don't have a table, because these beads can get away from you and it can be a little bit clumsy until you're used to doing it. 1, 2, 3, pull up a bead, chain 1, slip stitch in that chain behind the bead, one, 2, 3 chains, and single crochet in the next chain 1 space of the next V-stitch. All right, it's really simple, it's just a little bit clumsy. All right, I'll do one more just so that you can see it nice and clearly. There's my chain 3, chain 1 around the bead, slip stitch in the chain behind the bead, and then chain 3, and single crochet in the next chain 2 space of the next V-stitch and chain 3. I just love it. All right, I'm going to continue working around till I get back around to where I started. So I have stitched, adding my beads all the way around with all different colored beads, and I really love it. I think it has a really summer vibe to it. All right, so here's my last one. And I'm just going to join to that single crochet where we first started. String out of the way there. And tie that off. And it's very important where we added this row in that you tie this off securely. You're going to have 2 ends, of course, because if that comes unraveled, you're going to have beads all over the place. And so what I do is I'll weave it in a little bit and leave a tail. Then I'll do the other end. And weave that in just a little bit. And again, leave a tail. And then do a big no-no and tie a knot. Because I do not want my beads going all over the place because it accidentally came unraveled. So we weaved it in and tied a nice secure set of 3 knots. So I don't think that's going anywhere. All right. Now you will have this one little knot here where we did our blanket stitch, but that's on the inside of your collar. So that's not really going to matter. So here is my finished collar. My ends are all weaved in and I absolutely love this. It's a bright pink, although it might look red on your computer, with this teal trim and all these different colored beads. I think it has a marvelous summer feel to it. And I think it would look great with my jean jacket vest, or even just my jean jacket. Isn't that a fun project? I really enjoyed adding these collars to my t-shirts, and so I wanted to share it with all of you. A great way to take a shirt that maybe you don't care for anymore, or maybe has a coffee stain. And now it's a beautiful shirt that I can wear with a pair of jeans, with a skirt, with a nice pair of shorts, or even just add it with a jean jacket on top and stick that ruffle out. I love it. I think this one turned out perfect with the hot pink and the teal and all those beautiful beads. And I love this one too. So I did 2 different t-shirts that look different but use the same way of adding pizzazz. Well, thank you for being with me today for Friday Fun Day. And I cannot wait to show you what I got planned for next Friday. Bye-bye now.